Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be tackling a term I'm sure you've all heard before, probably a lot, but maybe haven't really had a chance to fully unpack. We're talking about the Palestine Nakba.
Yeah.
We're going to go beyond the headlines with this one, uncover some of those layers of history and memory, identity, all that's woven into this really complex event.
Right.
And to help us with this deep dive, we're using Nur Masalha's book, The Palestine Nakba, Decolonising History, Narrating the Subaltern, Reclaiming Memory. That's quite a title. Now, Masalha isn't just some random person with an opinion, by the way. He's a professor of religion and politics, so he's coming at this with some serious academic weight.
Definitely. And that comes through in his work, the way he connects the Nakba to a broader global context.
So before we go too far, just a quick reminder. The Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, refers to that period of mass displacement of Palestinians during the creation of Israel in 1948. Hundreds of their villages were destroyed, and, the effects of this time period, they're still felt today, making it absolutely crucial to understand, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that Masalha does so well is he connects the Nakba to this larger pattern of European settler colonialism. He really wants us to see it through that lens.
It's like he's saying, hold on, this wasn't just some isolated incident, but part of a much bigger, historical trend.
Exactly. And he backs this up with how, early Zionist leaders, they weren't shying away from the term colonization back then, like in the early 20th century when they were talking about their goals for Palestine. They were pretty upfront about it.
So going back to what you were saying about context, it's not enough to just look at what happened in 1948, right? We have to understand the ideology, the historical forces that led up to it, and what happened afterward as a result.
Right. And one of the most, I think, striking things that Masalha points to is this very deliberate effort to reshape the cultural landscape. When you look at the renaming of Palestinian places with Hebrew names, it wasn't just about changing a sign. It was about asserting a whole new narrative, like a new ownership over the land, over its history.
Yeah, it's almost like trying to erase the people who were there before, make it seem like they never existed.
That's exactly it. Masalha calls this memoricide the deliberate erasure of cultural memory, and it happens in so many ways. Renaming places, destroying physical spaces, suppressing narratives, even controlling what's taught in schools.
Oh, wow. Control of education. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, imagine, being a Palestinian student in Israel after the Nakba. The history lessons you're getting, the textbooks you're reading, they're probably going to paint a very specific picture of what happened, and it might not line up with your family's stories, or your community's memory.
Yeah, that would be so jarring. Like being told your own history, your own story is wrong.
Exactly. And it gets even more, I don't know about more complex, but there's also the language barrier to consider.
Oh, right, of course. Language plays a huge part in all of this.
Absolutely. And Masalha points out how Jewish students in Israel, they're required to learn English, but not Arabic. But Palestinian students are expected to learn both.
Wow, seriously. That's surprising. I mean, you'd think learning the language of, your neighbors would be encouraged, especially in a place like that with such a tangled, complicated history.
You would think so. But the way Masalha sees it, it's like there's this deliberate effort to maintain separation instead of, encouraging interaction and understanding.
It's almost as if they're trying to control the narrative from the classroom up, shaping how future generations understand the past.
And this control goes way beyond the classroom, too. Think about the history books themselves. Masalha points out that a lot of Israeli textbooks focus heavily on the narrative of Jewish return to their ancestral homeland after centuries of exile.
Which, from what we've been discussing, seems to kind of gloss over the fact that this return meant displacement for a whole other group of people who already called this land home.
Precisely. And that's where this whole idea of memoricide gets really, really disturbing, It's one thing to, say, control the physical space, but to try and control how people remember and understand history, that's a whole other level of erasure.
And speaking of controlling narratives, there's this really interesting bit in the book about Eliezer ben Yehuda, considered the father of modern Hebrew. This guy went to extraordinary lengths to revive the Hebrew language. He even raised his son only speaking Hebrew.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Imagine being that kid unable to talk to most of the world around him.
Right, but it just goes to show the lengths they were willing to go to construct this new cultural identity.
This new Hebrew man, as Masalha puts it. It was like they were building a nation and a whole new cultural identity at the same time.
And often, it seems, at the expense of acknowledging the Palestinian culture that was already there. When you lay it all out like this, it really does feel very intentional.
It does, doesn't it? And, I think that's a really key takeaway from Masalha's work, this intentionality. It's not just about what happened, but why it happened and how those actions are still shaping things today.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure. And we're just getting started, so we've been talking about this really deliberate effort to reshape the whole narrative around the Nakba. But erasing a culture's memory, it can't be as simple as just changing some names on a map or rewriting a few textbooks, can it? I mean, people hold on to their history, to their stories.
You're absolutely right. And that's where Masalha's book takes this really fascinating turn. He digs into how Palestinians have resisted this memoricide, actively working to reclaim their narrative and make sure their history isn't forgotten. It's a story of incredible resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. But how do you even start to reclaim your narrative when you're up against that kind of, institutional pushback? Where do you even begin?
Well, Masalha highlights the power of something that seems really simple but is actually so profound. Oral histories. Just imagine, families across generations passing down the stories of their displacement, the memories of their villages, just keeping those experiences alive by telling them again and again.
It's like creating this living history, a chain of memory from one generation to the next.
Exactly. And these oral histories, they become more than just personal stories. They become this collective act of resistance against this erasure of Palestinian history. It's a way of saying, we were here and we remember.
That's so powerful. But oral histories, as valuable as they are, they can be fragile. Memories fade. And eventually, the people who lived through these events, they're not with us anymore. So how else are Palestinians working to, solidify their history, make it more lasting?
That's where things get more, I guess you could say, formalized. Masalha talks about all these documentation projects that have sprung up, meticulously collecting everything they can. Photographs, maps, land deeds, you name it. Anything that can help piece together the Palestinian narrative.
It's like creating an archive, a tangible record to counter that erasure. It reminds me of those incredible projects that are mapping out the destroyed Palestinian villages, literally putting them back on the map.
Exactly. These projects are all about reclaiming space. And not just physical space, but space within the historical narrative itself. And it's not just happening in archives and universities. Think about the power of art, music, literature. These become powerful tools for Palestinians to express their experiences, keep the memory of the Nakba alive, and connect with people on a deeper, more emotional level.
So it's a multi-layered approach. It's happening on all these different levels to make sure their story is out there, that it's being told and heard.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the past either. One of Masalha's most important arguments is that the Nakba isn't over. It's not just a historical event. He says it's an ongoing process.
Okay, what do you mean by that? Is he saying the same forces are still at work today, like right now?
Exactly. Masalha points to what's happening with the Bedouin communities in the Negev desert. They've been living there for centuries, but they're under constant pressure to relocate. Their land rights are always being challenged, and their whole way of life is threatened.
So even today, you still see this displacement, this dispossession, this pressure to erase their presence. It might look different now, but it's still happening.
Precisely. And this connects to a much larger conversation about land rights, displacement, and how incredibly difficult it is to find any kind of lasting, just resolution.
It's like he's saying that to truly deal with the Nakba, you can't just acknowledge what happened in the past. You have to look at what's going on right now, today, because it's all connected.
Absolutely. And this is where Masalha brings up something really concerning about the ongoing Nakba. After the mass displacement in 1948, a lot of Palestinians had to leave their homes, right? Their property, their land, it was all left behind.
And I'm guessing those properties weren't just left abandoned.
You're right. This is where it gets really unsettling. Masalha talks about how Israel has been selling these Palestinian homes, the very homes that were left behind during the displacement.
Wait, hold on. Selling homes that don't belong to them? How is that even legal?
And that's exactly Masalha's point. He says this practice goes against international law. It's like they're being dispossessed twice over first force from their homes, and now any chance of return is being systematically dismantled.
It's heartbreaking. Not only the initial trauma of displacement, but now the possibility of return is being chipped away, making it even harder to even begin to heal those historical wounds.
Exactly. And this is why the idea of a continuing Nakba, it's not something we can just ignore. It's this stark reminder that this isn't just about fixing the past. It's about dealing with the very real consequences that are still happening right now. It's about recognizing that the past isn't really over. It's very much alive and present.
Wow, that's a lot to process. We've gone from what might seem like a straightforward historical event to this idea of a continuing Nakba, the long-lasting consequences, the displacement that's still happening, the struggle over who gets to tell the story, even the legality of property rights. It's really eye-opening.
It is, and that's what Masalha's work does so well, I think. He doesn't let us turn away from these difficult realities. He wants us to connect those past actions with what's happening today and really think about what justice and reconciliation would even look like in a situation as complex as this one.
It makes you realize that history isn't just about memorizing facts from a textbook. It's a conversation that's still going on, a debate, this constant struggle to understand and interpret the past in a way that's relevant to the present and the future.
Exactly. And who gets to speak, whose stories are heard, that makes all the difference. Masalha really pushes for a decolonized history, one that puts the experiences and voices of those who've been marginalized, silenced at the center.
So it's about making space for Palestinian voices, their stories, their understanding of history, to stand alongside and challenge those dominant narratives that have often defined how we view the Nakba.
Yes, exactly. And that's where those efforts we talked about, those oral histories, the documentation projects, the cultural expressions, they become so essential. It's about reclaiming that narrative, making sure their history isn't erased or rewritten by others.
It's about taking ownership of their own story. And this isn't just about looking back at the past either. It's about how understanding the Nakba, with all its intricacies, can help us make sense of what's going on in the region today, the challenges that are still present.
Absolutely. This deep dive into Masalha's work, I hope it's shown that grappling with the Nakba isn't just about revisiting something that happened decades ago. It's about confronting the legacy of those events, the struggles that continue, and the very difficult question of what a just and lasting resolution could look like. It's a conversation that requires our attention, our empathy, and honestly, our willingness to engage with some hard truths.
I agree. It certainly has for me. This deep dive has been a powerful reminder that to really understand something, we have to look beyond those simplified narratives and be willing to engage with the nuances, the complexities, even the disagreements that shape how we see history. It's not always easy. It might even be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's so important. And if you're feeling as challenged and inspired as I am after this conversation, Masalha points to some great resources to keep exploring these ideas. Check out the Institute for Palestine Studies, the Journal of Palestine Studies, and the work of scholars like Walid Khalidi. There's always more to learn, and hearing from diverse voices is key to understanding any historical event, especially one as multifaceted as the Palestine Nakba. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time as we take another closer look at a topic that deserves it.